So welcome and congratulations. Thank you for entrusting me with the most valuable asset and resource that you have, which is your time. And I promise not to squander it. And whenever you walk away from this training, you will have the answer from beginning to end, step by step, as you can see back here on my whiteboard, of how to go from where you guys are right now to bridging this gap, this divide between sales and operations once and for all. And it's going to take pretty much immediately, and with some effort and some work on your part and the work of your team, it can stick in the culture and become part of the culture in a very short period of time. And I'll unpack that and unfold that. But just a little bit of background about me in case you saw this video and you wanted the training but you don't know who I am. Again, my name is Duane Huff, and about 9 years ago, I believe, maybe 10. It's kind of, it was a transition for me. I started my company I.N.F.L.U.E.NC.E seminars with one client that brought me on for a short-term project that ended up turning out to be a little bit longer than they had suggested or promised. And I developed from there into working with several small, medium, and large-sized companies, training, developing, and consulting with them. So small businesses, medium-sized companies, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, across the board and across industries. But before that, for 14 years, after graduating from college, I was a sales professional. And I gotta be honest with you and say, in those 14 years of sales, the last 8 were absolutely amazing. I was in the pharmaceutical industry, very competitive, but it was good to me. And it was a great industry to be in. But before then, 2.5 years before then, I sold cell phones for Verizon Wireless. That went splendidly, but it was the first 6 years out of college that were absolutely brutal to me because I was trying to get my footing in the sales process. And I went through 9 jobs in the first 6 years, and that seems a little bit unstable, and I'll agree that it is. But what it allowed me to do as a sales professional is be inside of all of these amazing companies, some that you may recognize, Lanier Worldwide. There was one called US Unwired that was a startup. I'm trying to think of some of the others off the top of my head that you might recognize. But they were small businesses, medium businesses, and large companies. In the pharmaceutical industry, I was with Abbott Laboratories, was the big one that you would probably recognize. And between being a sales professional in those companies and then going out and doing sales, negotiations, leadership, management skills training for these other companies when I launched my business, taking the perspective of what I experienced as a sales professional and then seeing in other companies what they were experiencing, I understood the dynamic and the divide between sales and operations because I was a sales professional. And you know, every sales team that I was a part of, I had some pretty good managers, and the culture is that we treated, as sales professionals, we treated operations or delivery, the people who were gonna get the product or service out the door, with the utmost respect, and we just didn't push them in a direction and demand that they do what we sold, but we approached them humbly as servants to be able to empower them to be able to do their job effectively. We never looked at them as less. We never looked at them as part of another team. We always looked at them as an essential. In other words, if they couldn't do their job, we were dead in the water. If we went out and we sold it and they couldn't deliver it, what was the use? And that we were all on the same team. So part of the solution I'm going to share with you came from my experience as a sales professional. And when I got out into other parts of the world and industries and I started seeing other cultures not embracing that mindset, when I started seeing salespeople that were arrogant, that were pushy, that would dress down people, that would intimidate people, that would demand and literally yell at delivery and operations, that just blew me away. And I'm like, no, that's not gonna happen as long as I'm part of the organization, right? And so I didn't know how to change it immediately, but through the course of time and working with different organizations, talking with managers, CEOs, and business owners, and kicking around ideas, experimenting, trying. One of the things that the business owners would do, or the CEOs or the other sales VPs would do, they knew they could always bring me in to train their people because I could do one of 3 things. I could drop a flash bomb on their team of something that they wanted their team to do or know, and if it all blew up and fell apart, they could always point at me and say, yeah, it was him, right? Or if there was a message that they wanted to test to see what kind of response would come back, I could be the guy, since I was going to be there and I was going to leave, I could be the one to test it. Or if they'd been saying something or trying to implement something in the culture that they wanted to take, I was the third party who would come back and reinforce that message. And because I was all 3 of those things to the people that I worked with, we had great deep conversations, and they gave me a lot of rein to try things to bridge this divide. And so what I'm going to share with you today has been developed since I started in sales, but really has gotten a lot quicker and ramp up in the last few years as I started to see this time and time again being a problem, and I wanted a solution, because quite frankly, sales professionals are what drive business. There's no denying that. They're important. They're the lifeblood. We absolutely have to treat them with the utmost respect and give them all the tools that they need. But then you have operations, and if they're not able to do their job, if they're not empowered to do their job, the company's dead in the water. And so that's what I want to focus on in this video training, how to make that divide, how to bridge that divide once and for all. So let's jump in here. If we're going to learn how to bridge the divide between sales and operations, we need to understand the two biggest challenges that small, medium, and large companies face. And here's where I kind of developed this awareness, because no matter what company that I would go into to train, whether it was a small business with 10 employees, or whether it was a medium-sized company with 500 employees, or they had thousands of employees in a large corporation, inevitably when I would go into a new culture, a new environment, a new company, somebody, many times it was executive management, sometimes it was frontline people, sometimes it was middle management, and they would come up to me and somebody would pull me aside. They didn't want anybody else to hear, but they would pull me aside and they say, Duane, I just want you to understand there's a couple of big things going on in this company, and I just want you to be aware of them. And we have two big challenges in this company. And it was like everybody was reading from the same script, because they said pretty much identical these two things. They said, Duane, if we could overcome these two challenges, here's what they are. We have a problem and a challenge with, number one, communication, and number two, leadership. And rarely, if ever, were they not in the same order. Communication is the first one they identified, and leadership was the second one that they identified. You know what I came to find out? They were very highly attuned to what was going on, because it was accurate, right? So the two biggest challenges any company face when it comes to the human dynamic and the people dynamic, if you will, because I know outside technical and revenue and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of challenges, but when it comes to the human element and the human dynamic, the thing that I'm always brought into to fix is either communication or leadership. Now I realize that may seem very basic and simple, but we have to dig deeper into what's happening as a result of that lack of effective communication, or absence of, or lack of effective leadership. Because in number two, what we come to see is what causes and allows for the divide is the culture that's created as a result of the communication and leadership. Give you an example. The culture. So I worked with a company at one point where here was their MO from the top down, the top level in the organization to the executive management. And it was funny because the first couple of times I saw it, I couldn't believe it. I had to do a double take. And here's the way that they did things. They'd pull together, they'd stack hands, and they'd say, okay, here's our plan, here's what we're going to do. And then they would launch out to the rest of the company. They'd say, okay guys, this is what we're going to do, here's how it's going down, and here's what we're going to do, if everybody's okay with that. I'm not exaggerating. Literally, they would come in and say, here's what we're going to do, here's the changes we're going to make. But they would literally say, you know, if everybody's cool with that. I literally saw a CEO one time deliver an amazing speech. I mean, an amazing speech. And I was looking at the people in the room. They were compelled. They were on fire. You could just see them welling up. And I'm like, oh my God, this is one of the best speeches I've ever heard in my life. And I don't remember his exact words, but at the end of that presentation, he said something that was soft, like, well, you know, if it works out, or if we can pull it off, or something like that. And I went, oh my God. Probably one of the most motivational speeches, most empowering speeches, where he had a rally and a following. I could see it in the people's eyes, and I was so proud. Only to see that CEO back off, use soft language, and completely let everybody off the hook. And the culture of that organization, because of the leadership and the communication or lack thereof, was, here's what we're going to do, if everybody's okay with that. Now, I don't know where you are in your organization, and that might seem utterly ridiculous to you, and let me assure you, it is utterly ridiculous. But why was it that way? Again, it was because mainly a lack of pure, solid leadership. And here's what I mean by that. In this context, in leadership, and you know, I really get rattled, and maybe you do too. I get really rattled when I hear people in positions of authority referred to as leaders when in fact they're not. Do you have some of that going on in your organization? So first and foremost, we need to realize that leadership is earned. Just because we have a title doesn't mean we're a leader, right? And that's what was going on in the organization. You had a lot of titles, you had a lot of positions of authority, but you had no one standing in the wall, being the adult, saying, this is what we're going to do, because it's in the best interest of the company and it's in the best interest of the people. Here's the scenario, or here's the metaphor I'll give you. You know, it's, if you have children, you know this dynamic. I have 3 of them, and it's like somebody has to be the parent. When the kids get bratty, when the kids get out of line, when they step over the boundaries, when they don't want to comply and they don't want to work together, and they want to bicker and they want to fight, they want to put up walls and they want to make life difficult, and the culture just chaotic, then somebody has to come in and say, no guys, that's not what we do here. Here's what we're going to do. And I don't know what the culture is in your organization, and I know the reason that they couldn't do that is because they had let the children get loose and run the show for far too long. And let me let you guess who the children were. It was the salespeople. And they let the salespeople run roughshod over everybody, and they never called them out, they never stopped them, they never spoke against it, they never course corrected them or directed them, because they were scared that if they did, the whole operation would fall apart. And I remember talking to the CEO and saying, have you ever seen the Disney animated film called Ants? And he had children that were younger, and he did recall it. But I reminded him, I said, in the movie Ants, the ants were thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of ants in a colony, but every fall, this big swarm of grasshoppers would come and threaten them, intimidate them, and insist that they had a harvest of acorns or whatever it was for them that they could just come pick up and eat without having to work for it. And for years this went on, until one day the ants realized that they outnumbered the grasshoppers, and if they simply stood their ground and stood up to them, no longer could the grasshoppers, have control. And the whole moral of the story is that the power of the numbers to overthrow the tyrants, if you would. I've been in organizations, many organizations, where that's exactly the dynamic going on. And I'm like, guys, somebody has to be the adult. Somebody has to be the leader. But the problem is, that's not an easy transition to make. But it's doable. And I'll show you as we go through this how to make that happen without disrupting the culture. Because if the culture is messed up, or it gets disrupted, or if the culture is bad right now and that dynamic is going on, and it might not be that extreme in your organization, it might be mild, or it might be heading in that direction. But if the culture is like that, if there's one group that overpowers the other group, and it might be the fact that operations or delivery is overpowering sales. I can't imagine in a scenario where that would happen, but it could happen, right? But if the culture's jacked up, here's what it's going to impact directly, either positively or negatively. And it's going to directly impact the morale of both sides. And if it's positively impacting the morale, then obviously things are going to get done. They're going to work together. Things are going to get produced. It's going to be a great place to work. But if it's the other dynamic that I just mentioned, it's going to be a catastrophe, and you're going to lose good people. You're going to lose good managers. You're going to lose good salespeople. You're going to lose loyal operations people, and we don't want that. That's not a solution, right? So how do we correct this? How do we bridge this divide? What is the solution to being able to bridge this divide and having it take long term? So here's what has to happen. Number one, the leadership making mistakes here. The leadership has to decide what the culture is going to be. The leadership has to decide what the culture is going to be. Here's what I'm not saying. The salespeople don't get to decide what the culture is going to be. Operations and delivery do not get to decide what the culture is going to be. Leadership, and not positions of authority, not people in positions, but true leadership has to determine what that culture is going to be. And here's the thing that we need to add to that. Number 2, realize, and this comes from John Maxwell, the leading authority in leadership. He's been named number 1 for the past 5 years as the authority in leadership worldwide. He says it this way. He says, there's only one person in any organization that can change the culture. Only one person can change the culture in any organization. And I'd like to tell you it's the CEO. I'd like to tell you it's the president. I'd like to tell you it's the sales VP. But whoever is the true leader, the head person in charge, who's really in charge, who has the influence, that is the only person in the company that's going to be able to change the culture, because they get to make the decision. Now, if they make that decision and they can't get their executive team, their management team, or their leaders on board, then they're going to have an uphill battle. And generally that's when I'm called in to be able to make this take, because I can be the bad guy. I can be the 4-letter word, and they don't have to do it. So that's where I come in, and that's where my skill set lies. But I believe you can do this, and I'm going to show you how to do it. But only one person can change the culture. Hopefully that's the CEO or the president who can make the decision. But like in the example I gave you earlier, that was not the case. Not only was his leadership ineffective, but so was the rest of the leadership team. I mean, it was the blind leading the blind. And you know what? I'm not here to pick on anybody. It happens across industries. It happens in small, medium, and large-sized companies, because people who are good at what they do are generally the people who are promoted to management and leadership. Many times somebody who buys a company or starts a company was good at what they did, so they didn't have leadership skills, and they've never invested in them. So I'm not bruising anybody. I'm not picking on anybody, but they didn't yet have the skill set they needed to effectively lead and be the adult in a way that wasn't going to disrupt the culture, right? And so only one person can change the culture in an organization. So whenever that culture decision is made, the leader and the executives need to stack hands and say, yeah, we're all on the same page. We're committed to this. We're not going to waver. We're going to be a united front, because anything less will be unraveled quickly by both sides, right? But once that's in place, here's the first step that needs to happen in order to make this take in the culture. And it's a foundation that must be laid. And here's what it is. You've got to teach your sales team and your operations team or delivery team how to do 2 things. Number 1, we got to teach them how to communicate. Not just communicate, but communicate effectively, which means we need to back up and we need to break down the elements of communication that they don't understand. It's not just about the words you use. It's not how you say what you say. It's not just how you show up, but it's the intricacies of things we might be missing, not understanding, misunderstanding, hurrying through, or being distracted through, that we have to give them a solid foundation. Because when everybody is on the same page, one of my mentors said it this way: without a picture, confusion sets in. And even though we might be communicating and even connecting, we're all operating from a different paradigm of what good communication looks like or should be. And as a result, we're not operating on the same page. So there's confusion. We have to tie that down first and give your employees the skill sets they need to be effective communicators. That's number 1. Number 2, we've got to teach them how to negotiate. And I recommend investing in communication and negotiations training. You can probably do it all in 1 day or 2 days. Actually, I'd recommend probably 2 days. I deliver those services, so I'm always willing to help, but that's not what this is about. But if you need that, reach out to me. But you got to get these 2 in place. Here's why. Because if they understand how to effectively communicate, and then they understand the principles of win-win, those 2 combined creates an awareness that has to be in place before they can do what I'm about to share you in number 4. Recently did a training for a $450 million privately held company, and we combined negotiations, communication effectiveness, team building, and teamwork into a 2-day format, and we stretched it over a week. And at first, I'm gonna be honest with you, at first they're like, oh my God, this is lame, blah, 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 this doesn't apply to us, I don't know how this is gonna apply. And I've been revisiting because we do more training with that company, and every time I run across somebody that was in training who hasn't seen me in that space, comes up to me, he goes, oh my goodness, I use this every day. It truly is a win-win with my customers, with internal. We're getting so much more accomplished. So if you want your culture to change, the foundation has to be that everybody has the same picture and is on the same page when it comes to communicating effectively and then knowing how to win-win or create win-win scenarios. And I'll say it the way one of my mentors said it. When people collaborate, which is the nature of win-win, synergy happens, which means two people or two parties come together and share ideas in a way that ebbs and flows and gives and takes, that creates something greater than could have ever happened before they came together. But if they don't know how to do that, they feel like they're constantly hitting walls when communication breaks down. So that foundation has to be laid. And I encourage you, if you haven't done so already, invest in this training for your organization and your people. Because once you've laid that foundation of being able to communicate truly effectively and negotiate, and when I say negotiate, I don't mean big stakes contracts, boardrooms, high stakes. I mean it's everyday give and take. I'll give you an example. I like to tell people it's every day, it's the way we get things done. And negotiation benefits when I come to the table and you come to the table, you need something, I need something. I want, need, and expect something. You need, want, and expect something. Well, we come to the table because we've decided that it's in our best interest to work together to get that thing. And when I can walk away reasonably getting what I needed, wanted, or expected, and you can do the same thing, we create a win-win, which facilitates strengthening of relationship, and we can come back and do this time and time again. And that happens in businesses, that happens between employees, with bosses, with employees, co-workers, it happens with your spouse, it happens with your kids, and I kid you not, this happened the other day. So I've taught negotiations for probably, the last 9 years. My favorite thing to teach. And the other day I was blown away because we were at a fair with the kids, me and my wife, and the little one, who's 3 years old at that point, is following us around, and we're like, oh my goodness, we've got to find a way to get rid of her. To be honest, we wanted to pawn her off on somebody who would babysit her for a little while, but we couldn't find anybody, right? So she's there with us, and all of a sudden, my son had been hanging out with his friends. He's 11 years old. He'd been hanging out with his friends. He comes running up to us, goes right up to my wife and goes, Mom, can I go play with my friends? And she said, absolutely, as long as you take your sister. He goes, without hesitating, he looks at her and goes, done. I'm like, oh my God, win-win. It happens just like that. And it's so important to be able to establish how to create a win-win outcome for both parties and communicate effectively, because what happens next hinges upon that foundation. And here's what happens next. When you decide as leadership team what the culture is going to be, you have one of two choices, and you might have to use a combination of both. In order to infuse this into your culture or to change the dynamic between sales and operations, and you've decided no longer are they going to get away with this, no longer are they going to get away with this, but they're going to work together and have each other's back, one of two things has to happen, maybe a combination of both. The first thing is, as a leadership team, you simply stand firm and you have the conversation with your team, your sales team and your operations team. Guys, this stops now. Moving forward, here's how we're operating, no exceptions. Now, if you don't have a culture in your business already where your salespeople and your operations people know you have their back, trust you, and know they can do no wrong, you're simply there to guide and direct them. If they don't have that level of trust in the leadership, that will not work. You do that, it's a flash bomb, you'll lose all of your good employees. So I'm not recommending you do that. But if you do have a solid relationship of trust and they know that you would never do anything to hurt them, that you've always had their back. I had a manager in pharmaceutical sales. She was absolutely amazing. And one of the reasons she was so amazing is because she sheltered us from everything that was coming downhill and always protected us. And we knew we could tell her anything. And if you have that relationship with your people, you might be able to get away with simply saying, guys, this is the way we're moving forward. And they may even come along. But the second way to do it is what I have written right here in number 4, is that you're going to have them co-create the culture agreement. You're going to have them co-create the culture agreement because there's an old saying that says people support what people help create. In other words, if you tell them, that's your idea. If you enforce it or you tell them what to do, then that's you putting it on them. But if they create it, they have natural ownership in it, and you have a much better time of getting buy-in and compliance without having to go behind and manage it, and has a better chance of sticking in your culture. So let me reset this board off camera, and I'll come right back and show you how to have that conversation. Okay, so we're back through the magic of technology. You didn't have to watch me reset the board. But let's talk about how to facilitate this conversation in a way that's collaborative, and the way that they're engaged, self-discovering and understanding that people support what people help create. Because again, we can tell them what the culture is going to be, and maybe we have to do a little bit of that if this doesn't play out the right way. But ideally, if we can get them to co-create and self-discover that there is a challenge, a problem, and that it needs to be bridged, we're going to do so much better as leaders facilitating transition and transformation change in the culture, which ultimately will stick long term. Because if they own it, if they create it, they own it. And if they own it, they're going to police it, they're going to manage it, they're going to manage it, they're going to hold each other accountable. And I've seen this time and time again, especially in sales teams. Somebody will come in or get hired on a sales team, and if they're a tight-knit group and that person simply doesn't fit, one of two things happens. They either make it really uncomfortable for that person not to fit in. They're not trying to get rid of them or hurt them or pick on them or something like that, but they just insist on a certain criteria and a certain level and a certain way of doing things, that if that person doesn't comply, they kind of drift out or remove themselves from the organization. Another way of looking at that is that manager I had back at in the pharmaceutical world at Abbott Laboratories. I remember sitting down with her one time because I saw a lot of people transition off of her sales team, and it concerned me because I wasn't scared of losing my job, but I just saw these people leaving, and I sat down with her one day. I felt like I could tell her anything. I had a great relationship of trust, and I said, I said, that must be hard. And she said, what? I said, firing people. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, it's got to be hard firing people. She goes, I don't fire people. I'm like, I've seen 3 people leave your team in the last 3 months. She goes, I've never fired a person as long as I've been a manager. I said, well, I'm confused. She said, I don't have to fire them. I just make it really uncomfortable for them to be here. And the reason, or the way that I do that, is I set and insist upon a standard or the way things are going to be done in our culture. And if they can't fit in with it, it makes them uncomfortable and they leave. I've never had to fire anybody. And so what happens is that if we allow them to co-create this culture agreement moving forward, they're invested in it because they created it. Because you're going to see in a second, they pulled it apart, they saw the good, the bad, and the ugly, and they decided this is the way forward. And we really didn't have to tell them. You're going to see in a second that you're simply facilitating this conversation. And again, if for some reason you have resistance and it doesn't take, you might have to infuse a little bit of, look guys, this is the culture moving forward, and I'm giving you the opportunity to lay it out, to draw it out, to say the way that you feel it should be, and together we'll create something that works across the board that we'll consistently adhere to, right? People support what people help create. And so the first thing you want to do is you just want to create a space in an area that says, look, I've got your back, you're friends, we got each other's back, we're on the same team, and create that as the leader. And set the tone. And simply say, look, we're going to talk about some things. I'll start us out, and you be the one to take the first step if you need to. But encourage them, go and draw on a piece of flip chart paper or on a whiteboard. Say, look, let's just get it out. Let's talk about some of the things between sales and operations that is extraordinarily good, or things that we do absolutely well. Start with the positive first, obviously, right? And have them list some things that are, things like, well, we follow up with each other. Maybe it's an outside sales team and an inside sales team. And one thing that they're really good at is that if the salesperson's going to initiate, if the inside salesperson is going to initiate something, they always let the outside salesperson know, and vice versa, so nobody's blindsided. Well, if that's a positive and you know it to be a positive, let it put it up there and go ahead and write it down. But if you see it differently than they do as the CEO or the business owner or the VP, simply ask a question and say, tell me more about that. How do you mean exactly? Give me an example. So you have to be the one that asks the questions to get them to think deeper and really self-discover. Because if they're not doing a good job of following up or following through or communicating with each other in that respect, then you have to be able to ask the questions that gets them to see it. Now, this is not a quick process. This might take a few meetings to be able to do, but the dividends will pay off big time when you, as the CEO, the business owner, or the manager, don't have to go behind and manage it over and over again. When they create this, they will support it. So go ahead and list all the things, or have them list all the things that they see as positive. And what you're going to see is that some of the things that some list as positive are going to end up over a no, we don't do that very well column, because everybody's going to have a different perspective, which is why that communication, that effective communication, and the give and take of negotiation has to be understood before we go into this, right? Because we need to understand the foundation that when we're spitballing ideas and co-creating, that every idea is received and boarded, though it might not be implemented, it's not going to be criticized or judged. And you as the leader have to create that tone and set that tone as you go into this activity. So exhaust this as much as you possibly can. It might take up 5 sheets. Hopefully it does. But the more likely scenario is when you get here, they just unload. Oops. They just unload. Okay, sorry about that. So they just unload, and it becomes so easy to talk about the things that aren't going well. And you have to be the leader who steers that conversation, but you have to let them get it out. Because it's imperative for them to visually see the good, the bad, and the ugly, so it's not swimming around here and the frustration is not harbored. But just by doing this activity, I've seen it across organizations, I've seen it in sales teams, management teams, I've seen it in frontline employees, credit, admin, all different areas of the company, that when we do this activity, the first benefit is that it gets everything out in the open. And you've created as a leader an environment where it's okay to express opinion and examples without calling people out, but calling it out. Never call them out, call it out, as somebody once told me. So this is the first foundation. We have to get this. Don't rush this. Let this play out. And then ask, okay, if we're going to take the things that aren't working very well and keep the things that are, so that we can create a culture that is consistent, that serves both sides, and that sales has the back of operations and operations has the back of sales at all times, realizing, and you have to state this pretty clearly, realizing that we're on the same team first and foremost, and the team is here to serve the customer. And that if sales can't effectively do their job, we're dead in the water. And if operations can't effectively do their job, we're dead in the water. And so it's a symbiotic relationship. We must have each other's back, and we have to serve each other as committed and as aggressively as we would for our customer. I've seen time and time again where there's a disconnect. An outside salesperson will go the distance, go to the mat for their customer. But for some reason, when it comes to dealing with supporting and being the part of the team of the inside people on the inside sales team or operations, they won't treat them with the kid gloves, the same respect and the fervor that they treat their customer. They treat them like the redheaded stepchildren, right? And if you're redhead and I apologize, but you get what I'm saying, right? But what we have to impress upon both sides and instill in them and in this culture is that we're all, as internal customers, just as important to the equation into the business as the external customer. And if you can impress upon that and let it be one of those things that everybody's stacking hands in agreement on, because very few people are going to stand out and speak out against that, especially when other side is there with them. But you'll establish that we're on the same team and we have to have each other's back and we have to treat each other as importantly as we do the customers. And if you establish that, the next thing that happens is you say, okay, great guys, how should our culture agreement look moving forward? In other words, if we're going to bridge this divide to where we don't have the confusion, the miscommunication, the backbiting, the struggles, the challenges, the confrontation that's completely derailing us and keeping us from going to where we need to be, what do we need to do and how should it look? And the hardest thing as a leader of this conversation for you is going to be to just be patient enough to listen and insist that they come forward with the answer. And I've been training for years, and many times, I'll give you one of the things my mentor did. When you're having this conversation, if nobody wants to be the first one to answer, and you know your team, and you know that's probably going to be the case, before you ask the question, put somebody's name on it. Or ask the question and then put somebody's name on it. I'll give you an example. So Tom, how should this look, in your opinion, if you knew or had to guess? It's a very important statement. If you knew or had to guess. Because what you've just done is taken the pressure and guilt out of answering. Because if they know, they can answer in confidence. If they have to guess, it's no big deal if they get it wrong. If you knew or had to guess, Tom, how should that look? How would you have it look? When you do that, Tom is put on the spot to give an answer, but you've taken him off the hook because you're not putting him on the spot if you knew or had to guess. And then Tim or Sue, who is sitting next to Tom, goes, uh-oh, he's calling on me next. And so they step up their game and know that they probably are going to be called on next. It's one of those subtle little things for facilitation and in leadership that will help facilitate that conversation. Hopefully you'll have somebody in the room who's willing to speak out, and once one person opens up, everybody starts opening up. Once you've done this though, I think you'll be fine. So how should this look? How should it look moving forward in our culture agreement? And so allow them to, again, and remind them, listen, we're going to spitball ideas here. Not all the ideas are going to be implemented, but they're all going to be heard and they're all going to be received. People support what people help create. And by the nature of you facilitating this conversation, you're going to have guys spitball ideas and girls spitball ideas. And there's going to be a temptation in the room to laugh, snicker, say that was a stupid idea because of the nature of who we're dealing with, right? And it's your job as a leader and facilitator of this conversation to be able to say, all right, guys, look, we're just spitballing. Every idea is welcome and we want to hear them all. You want to encourage that, because even if you don't take their suggestions and implement them into your culture agreement moving forward, everybody feels heard. And as a result, they feel like they've co-created what the final agreement looks like. Again, people support what people help create. So you want to make sure everybody has a voice in that. And by that nature, they feel like they've created this, and whenever you guys have finished with this process right now, and maybe you pass the pen and let other people facilitate this conversation, but at the end of the day, write out an agreement of how it's going to look moving forward, the respect that each team is going to have for each other, how you're going to show that respect, how you're going to follow up, how you're going to communicate when things get challenging, how you're going to negotiate and work through them, and set policies and standards in place that they co-create, that you can write a paragraph that says, moving forward, here's what our culture of sales looks like between sales and operations. And for example, we could say something like, at all cost, we will fight as hard for a win for our internal customers as we would for our external customers. We will communicate effectively and completely. If it's misunderstood when we say it, we will make sure that we take ownership of communicating in a way that it can be received. And we will honor each other, watch out for each other, and have each other's back at all costs. And I'm just shooting off the top of my head here, but those are some of the thoughts that have come over time. So again, if you will take this, it starts with leadership and communication. It directly impacts the culture, and the culture directly impacts positively or negatively the morale. So what do you have to do? Leadership, probably the CEO or the C-level executive or the owner of the business, hopefully the entire executive team comes together and says, this is what our culture should be. This is what sales and operations should do, how they should work together, and how this should be resolved. And then you start the communication by teaching your sales and your operations team how to communicate and negotiate effectively. And I recommend that you have them go through that class at the same time and mix them up so that they have to, in real time, communicate and negotiate through role play scenarios and activities together, and you mix them up so they have to learn together how to work through it. And then once you've had that foundation laid, sit them down, talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Have them spitball and brainstorm these ideas, empower them and encourage them to talk, because people support what people help create. Have them tell you and create what your agreement should look like moving forward and how the team should work together. And when you're done, either you or them writes out an agreement in paragraph form. That's kind of a culture agreement, a code, or a way that you guys will bridge that gap moving forward. And here's the beautiful thing. We don't always have to tell them what it needs to be. Many times they will use their good sense and their good judgment and their sense of what's right to come up with it yourself. And if you're good at just being patient and facilitating this, they will support it, they will create it, and you won't have to manage it. But being the leader that you are, if you're watching this, if this doesn't go splendidly the way it should, then at some point you're going to have a conversation as an adult would to their children and simply say, hey, look guys, this has gotten out of control. You guys are running roughshod over these guys, or you guys are disrespecting these guys, and that stops today. And moving forward, based on everything that we talked about, here's what I hear is the best solution. Boom, boom, boom. Everybody stacks hands. We come to agreement and commitment. You didn't have to shatter anybody's ego. You didn't have to bruise anyone. You didn't have to threaten anyone. Nobody feels like their job is threatened. And all of a sudden, the elephant in the room is addressed in a very respectful, diplomatic way, but one that moves the needle to effectiveness. So I hope this serves. If you have any questions about it or comment, if there's a place to leave a comment below the video, please feel free to do so. Or if you have any questions, reach out to me. My email address is info@influenceseminars.com. Or if you're on my homepage, or maybe there's a button down here, click through, and what happens, there's a form you can fill out. If you'd like to have a one-on-one conversation about this with me, to ask those questions or see how we implement this in your organization, or even see if you'd like to work with me to help you do this, we can do it live, we can do it virtual. We'll talk about what that looks like. But at the end of the day, if you simply follow what I just gave you, and go back and watch the video again, if you implement what I just gave you, you should be able to change the dynamic and bridge the divide between sales and operations once and for all, and have it stick in your culture for the duration of your company. So again, my name is Duane Huff, Influence Seminars and Business Success Partners. It's been an honor to serve you. Let me know if I can continue to serve you. Reach out to me if you have any questions, and I look forward to talking to you soon.